Who is the most evil person in history to get away scot-free for their crimes? Idi Amin spent the rest of his life living in luxury in Saudi Arabia. At least Pol Pot spent the rest of his life mouldering in a jungle. It'd say that both of them got away almost completely with their evils. Idi even made a second go of it, attempting a new coup that failed instantly before fleeing back to SA. They let him stay on the premise that he was forbidden from ever attempting to leave again. That Japanese doctor who drowned Chinese prisoners to calculate how much seawater can a man take before they die, he got scot-free in exchange for his research. Shiro Ishii of Unit 731 Infamy was a worse Japanese doctor of that era, as were those who dissected alive captured as bomber crews to demonstrate things to students. All in all, Japanese medicine of that era would have benefited from a little bit more execution. That is called vivisection when done alive. Almost all of Unit 731, Imperial Japan as a whole, was let off the hook too easily. Unit 731 is absolutely terrible. That is just one of the ways Japan was just as bad as the Nazis in WLL. No wonder they got along so well. Pol Pot, Cambodian genocide. Died of old age decades after killing millions of Cambodians in the space of only a couple of years. Don't forget why many of the Cambodians killed wore eyeglasses. Pol Pot was such an idiot he associated a lack of proper eyesight with intellectual superiority, and so had who he saw as a bunch of smarty pants executed. Pol Pot loved the poorly educated. The irony is that he was a teacher. I want to expand on this some. He associated glasses with it because many professors, etc., wore glasses. If he thought that needing glasses meant you were intelligent, I had not heard that. Here is the kicker. He wore glasses and was very highly educated. He wasn't actually that highly educated. He went to Paris, dropped out and ended up in technical college. But he liked to hang out with revolutionaries. He was only well educated by comparison with illiterate farmers. The thing about killing people who wore glasses was a bit of a footnote in the awful narrative of the killing fields, and was more about the fact that there were no qualified native ophthalmologists in Cambodia at the time. So those wearing glasses must have contacts either with the French or worse the Vietnamese and were therefore suspect. Thank you for that context. Maybe it was can afford glasses is not a farmer. Live in Cambodia, clicked in hopes it would be top comment. Was not disappointed. Just spent the weekend in Phnom Penh. Beat me to it. My heart breaks for the Khmer people. They are so resilient. I first went 10 years ago and finally went back this past week. The progress is insane, and unlike in Bangkok, it's mostly locals enjoying the new stuff in Phnom Penh. They haven't been priced out yet of enjoying their city. It healed a little piece of me to see how happy so many Cambodians are now, even with the conflict. Some things are hard right now with the land border closed. But if Thailand doesn't want to do good business, Vietnam sure does. I was in Cambodia 10 years ago, and they really are a wonderful people. Stoic, resilient, and friendly. It's a very poor country, though Phnom Penh and Angkor Wat are stunning. Their history is incredibly tragic. I would encourage anyone to visit. A holiday in Cambodia? I first learnt of Pol Pot directly from this song in, 1984? I don't remember exactly. But I was in elementary school and just really liked the songs, to which my much older sister was listening. When my parents heard me walking around the house singing, Pol Pot, they were naturally curious how I knew the name. My dad sat me down and told me all about Pol Pot and Idi Amin and Mao Zedong. It shattered my image of what I believed was a fun little song, but it also taught me about activism through song, and gave me a deep and abiding love for punk and early skate music. I was also the first kid at my school to sport a mohawk and pierced ears. Side note, are there any other old people here that remember the weird thing in the ADS with men's ear piercings? You had to pierce the left ear only, or it meant you were gay. I remember the boys at school all trying to call me gay for having both ears pierced. The only problem was I didn't think of gay as being in any way bad, so it didn't really feel like they were insulting me. Indonesian President Suharto was responsible for 2 genocides, one on his own country in 1965, and another one in East Timor in 1975 to 1999. He was one of the most corrupt leaders of all time and led an authoritarian nationalist regime. While a protest movement caused by the Asian financial crisis caused him to resign, he was never punished and died a very wealthy person. His family is still wealthy and respected, and his former son-in-law is the current president. Edit, I just realized that I'm writing this on the 30th of September, which is the anniversary of the failed coup attempt that led to Suharto's rise to power and the subsequent genocide that came after. Do read the Jakarta Method. It's an excellent book that discusses these events. Similar story with the Marcos family here in the Philippines. While they did not commit the same kind of genocide, they plundered billions from the people, killed, tortured thousands, and massacred entire towns in Mindanao. Now, Marcos Jr. is the president. Former President Duterte is now in ICC being tried for murder, but his daughter is still wildly popular and seen to run for president in 2028. I heard Marcos Jr. and Prabowo Suharto's son-in-law, current president, used the same political consultants to win their campaigns. The 2016 and 2022 presidential campaign and propaganda were mostly done via Facebook to Tuk algorithm. Political campaigns use the data mined from Facebook without consent. Check the Cambridge Analytica scandal. If anyone is interested in this, read the Jakarta Method. It goes more into the backstory and repercussions of Suharto's reign. Wonderfully interesting read on a truly horrific subject. Jimmy Savile's crimes were never uncovered until he died. He was celebrated as a national treasure, given a knighthood by the Queen, and was viewed as a great character, slightly inappropriate at times, but ultimately harmless. In reality, he was hiding in plain sight. The things he was able to get away with whilst winking to the camera are haunting. Ironically enough, Johnny Rotten, real name John Lydon of the Sex Pistols, was one of the first people to call Savile out publicly while he was still alive. JR got in trouble for saying such nasty things about that dear old man. Wiki Lydon stated, "I'd like to kill Jimmy Savile. I think he's a hypocrite. I bet he's into all kinds of seediness that we all know about, but are not allowed to talk about. I know some rumors." He added, "I bet none of this will be allowed out." As predicted, the comment was edited out by the BBC prior to broadcasting. Funny how a man who got banned from the radio for being in bad taste knew where the real bad taste was all along. He called Savile out in 1978, way before anyone else did, and he did it on BBC Radio 1. One of the family of stations that the Sex Pistols record was banned on. Reminds me of how Bill Cosby hated Richard Pryor because he told dirty jokes, did drugs, and cursed a lot. Honey, Richard ain't the problem here. He knows. He's an addict in recovery. Bill is the serial rapist. Just took 40 years for it to be figured out. Also hated on Eddie Murphy a lot when he was a young comedian and was of zero help to him at all. Really disappointed Eddie. He also rang up comedy clubs to cancel gigs for Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, D.L. Hewley, and other black comedians of the 80s and 90s icons. But those guys, in spite of their faults, weren't the ones carrying around roofies and preying on random women. The BBC knew. So, his crimes weren't uncovered after his death, they were just finally publicized. Yeah, people on the inside knew. And people like Johnny Rotten had heard rumors. But the general public, for the most part, were unaware. Joseph Mengele was the angel of death at Auschwitz. He died swimming off the coast of Sao Paulo in 1979, 34 years post-war. Definitely one of the most evil people that ever lived. He didn't have the numbers some of the people on this list do, but he was on the ground with scalpels and syringes doing evil shit every day. He's one of the people that make me hope hell is real. He's very interesting within the ranks of the Nazi atrocities, because he's one of the few that isn't nearly as politically or racially motivated. He didn't particularly hate the Jews, not any more than was common in Europe at the time, and he wasn't a die-hard Nazi either. His kind of evil was the willing opportunist. So much of his evil was supporting research, and most of these victims were being donated to other doctors who wanted test subjects. And those doctors were objectively worse on the really twisted shit. But he was integral in selecting subjects. He did a lot of really horrific things personally, but there's no sign that he particularly likes or enjoyed it. It was just nothing to him. Just science and medicine. And these people weren't people. When we talk about the banality of evil, he might be the poster child for that. He just didn't care. It's one of those who is actually worse. Debates. I think this describes most evil though. I think there are very few people on earth who enjoy causing harm. That's cartoon villain shit. Most evil people just don't care about the harm they're causing if it's getting them something they want. He's definitely the poster child for the banality of evil. This part about him especially sticks out to me in a haunting way. Mengel's research subjects were better fed and housed than the other prisoners, and temporarily spared from death in the gas chambers. 70 His research subjects lived in their own barracks, where they were provided with a marginally better quality of food and somewhat improved living conditions than other areas of the camp. 71 When visiting his young subjects, he offered them sweets. Some children referred to him as Uncle Mengel. 52 In contrast to most of the other SS doctors, who viewed selections as one of their most stressful and unpleasant duties, he undertook the task with a flamboyant air, often smiling or whistling. 48 A former Auschwitz inmate doctor said of Mengel, he was capable of being so kind to the children, to have them become fond of him, to bring them sugar, to think of small details in their daily lives, and to do things we would genuinely admire. And then, next to that, the crematorium smoke and these children. Tomorrow, or in a half hour, he is going to send them there. Well, that is where the anomaly lay. 72 That's insane. Cognitive dissonance, true sociopathic behavior. When I was in middle school, we had a Holocaust survivor come and talk to our class. She was at Auschwitz and described meeting Mengel. Her and her sister were lined up with other children, and he came down the line to inspect them. One by one, he would take them by the hand and pull them out of line, twirling them around like a dancer to get a good look at them each from all angles. He chose her sister and took her away. That was the last time she ever saw her. Yea, some people order it and never see the atrocities. This guy was like the doctor from fucking Human Centipede. I've never met anyone who's heard of this guy, which is wild to me. I have a story I like to tell from when I worked at a hospital that always lands with a thud. The story is that when I was 15 and working at a nearby hospital as a volunteer, I'd frequently hear over the loudspeaker, "Paging Dr. Mangler. Paging Dr. Mangler." After hearing this enough to know I wasn't crazy, I finally went to verify that there was in fact a Dr. Mangler, because the idea of lying in a bed waiting for your doctor just to find out his name is Dr. Mangler was hilarious to me. Well, turns out the person calling him over the loudspeaker was mispronouncing his name, and Mangler was actually Mengel, which I found to be way worse. Not only that, he was still in Germany for 4 years after the war, then got papers from West Germany in 1956 under his real name and even went back to visit. I like to think that, as he struggled to keep his head above water, he felt the ghosts tugging at his leg. He led a fairly miserable life in South America, but always had the goal of returning to Germany and taking up his long-desired professorship, as well as taking over the family tractor business. So glad that none of his hopes or dreams came true. Fuck, he died off the coast of Bertioga, one of my favorite vacation spots. That just makes it cooler. Your favorite vacation spot, drown Mengel. You get to piss on his watery grave and none would be the wiser. Pretty neat. King Leopold II of Belgium, millions died under his rule in Congo, and he faced almost no real consequences. First person I thought of. He really fucked up the Congo. It's also a very misunderstood part of history, particularly because it's hard to grasp how it happened. It was Leopold II's personal business venture. Belgium had no say in it at first. He was very good at securing the land all by himself. In fact, one of the reasons he got it was his whole PS spin on the matter, e.g. stopping the Arab slave trade. Yes, I'm not joking. And the other was just scheming with the likes of Henry Morton Stanley, gathering nonsensical permissions from the local population. In 1885, when the colonial powers carved up Africa, Leopold II knew that he could lobby himself into getting all that land under the guise of it being a neutral, humanitarian free trade zone. So it happened. He never set foot in the Congo Free State. In fact, there weren't many Belgians or Europeans in the Congo at any point in history. Leopold's tactic was to provide the incentives to the directors, who then gave orders to the local population, exploiting local tensions and previous bloodshed, and arm a part of the population and have them systematically brutalize everyone at their own discretion. Yes, you read that right. The Congo was ridden with violence even before all this happened. Slave trade. 2. But don't let that distract from the systematic atrocities under Leopold's rule. I will spare the details for now. Eventually, after global backlash, interesting tidbit, Mark Twain famously wrote a pamphlet attacking Leopold II. He was forced to hand it over to Belgium. People booed him at his funeral, which was very unusual for a monarch in Europe. He wasn't a very popular figure in Belgium, often described as unpleasant and hard to work with. His legacy, however, is the architectural grandeur he ordered and had built in Belgium, much of which used funds siphoned from the Congo. Now, the real controversy happens later actually, because back then, it was a really big scandal and left a big stain on not only the royals, but on Belgium itself. If it wasn't for two world wars happening soon after, it wouldn't have escaped the public consciousness as much as it has. But it did. Things looked up for the Congo somewhat after Belgium stepped in, but only marginally so. The subsequent mismanagement up until the independence of the Congo is nothing to be proud of either. At least basically everyone today agrees on that last part too. Today, the controversy persists and has been given more attention the last decade or so. For any regular Belgian, however, it ranges from domestic debates, e.g., do we leave his statues? Do we take them down? Or maybe just provide context on the base? Are apologies in order? Reparations? To perhaps just a mild annoyance whenever Americans bring it up abroad. Older people will brush you off. Younger people will engage with you about the topic more openly. That last part is important, however. The gross majority of Belgians never interacted or had anything to do with anything related to the Congo. Not even way back then. Sometimes you'll hear apologists or ignorant people with some dumb takes on the matter. I'll happily shut them up. However, it's a very dark part of my country's history. I'm glad it received the recent attention it has, but I also wish people knew more about it instead of using it as a gotcha moment whenever Belgium gets mentioned. When you're so cruel, other colonizing nations get disgusted and tell you to knock it off. The list is much longer than anyone would like it to be. Warren Anderson, thousands died because of his careless and harmful methods of management of Union Carbide factory in India, and thousands more born defective after the disaster for years to come. Bhopal gas disaster. Was that the one where they knew there was a leak but went to tea time anyway? Yes, the Bhopal disaster. By 11:30 p.m., workers in the MIC area were feeling the effects of minor exposure to MIC gas and began to look for a leak. One was found by 11:45 p.m. and reported to the MIC supervisor on duty at the time. The decision was made to address the problem after a 12:15 am tea break, and in the meantime, employees were instructed to continue looking for leaks. The problem was discussed by MIC area employees during the break. The result was around 500,000 injured people and at least 8,000 killed people. To put that into perspective, that's over twice the amount of people killed compared to those that died during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. 2,511 seconds. Even today, the groundwater around the area has toxicity levels that exceed safe levels by several orders of magnitude. Least 8,000 killed people. I've heard too many conflicting accounts of the true number who were killed. Some as high as 22,000. This was the single worst industrial accident in world history. It's relatively recent, less than 40 years ago. Few people know about it or care about it because it was in India. The Sackler family sold opioid addiction to the country that trusted them and made them rich. Now, instead of having to answer for their crimes, they've become anonymous and hide among us. They made 20 billion and were forced to pay 5 billion in restitution, and can never be sued again. If that's not scot-free, I don't know what is. I'll be waiting for them in hell. Though, I'm patient. This is a good modern-day answer. That documentary on the opioid crisis and this family, I believe it was on Netflix, was wild. There's also an amazing gothic horror show on Netflix, The Fall of the House of Usher, that uses it as the background for the story. Instead of Sackler, they just use the name Usher. Pretty much everything else is identical. Also a brilliant translation of Edgar Allan Poe stories. 1010 would recommend. I used to work for Purdue Pharma almost 20 years ago and was embedded with guys that did the 2-year tour of duty where you were the Sackler's personal IT contact. The stories I have heard are absolutely insane, from calling the guy on Christmas Day to drive to Long Island to install a game for their kid, to another one, just up and leaving the guy at their house working on stuff with their infant in another room alone. They also absolutely hated each other and would rage if they called. And you said you would be there when you could, because they knew that meant you were helping another one of them. Was really hoping to see this one. That family's body count is crazy high, and legal discovery in some cases showed emails from the family pushing the marketing even harder after the addiction issue became well known. They knew, made billions and didn't care. Truly evil. And they specifically targeted people in WV and PAR because they did manual work and had chronic pain. How many lives they destroyed. Robert H. Richards, 4. He's a billionaire heir to the DuPont family who raped his 3-year-old daughter. Not only does he come from a family who poisoned the entire world with PFAS, to which we are still facing the problems today, but he also faced no prison time because, and I quote, "The defendant will not fare well in prison. Rules are only for the poors. Billionaires are literally above the law. See the Epstein fiasco. We don't have a justice system, we have a legal system." Excuse me, what the fuck? I have to hand it to Wikipedia for not fucking around with his bio. It starts out with him as a child rapist and only casually follows it with him being an heir to DuPont. Perpetrators of Unit 731 spared so America could get what they learned. Close to 500,000 people killed. Biological experimented on. And the vast majority of the information was useless. That was the most enraging thing I learned from Sheldon Harris' Factories of Death. What do you mean knowing that bayoneting babies kills them is useless? This research is priceless. The punks who tortured, raped, and killed Junko Furuta are all out of prison. 2 of them got what they deserved. J. Ogura died after he got his head stuck between his toilet bowl and its tank, unable to free himself and choking on his own vomit. Yasushi Watanabe got a neurodegenerative disease and was too impoverished to pay for it. It killed him after making him suffer. The other ones unfortunately went on to commit even more crimes and got virtually non-existent punishments or no punishments at all. Japan's justice system is complete and utter dogshit. Joe got a humiliating final destination. Death. Issei Sagawa, a Japanese student that killed and cooked and ate a fellow student in Paris. June 1981. His parents were rich, we went back to Japan and became a celebrity. Oh, geez. That was a rough read. As usual, a failure of justice. That is really fucked up. His celebrity status didn't last long, and he died in relative poverty because Japanese society shunned him. It's far from justice, but at least he got some punishment one way or the other. Joshua Blahi Arca, General Butt Naked, apparently killed 10,000 people and practiced cannibalism in the Liberian Civil War. He's now a preacher. Shiro Ishii. Americans decided his research was too valuable for anything to happen to him after WW2. Other Japanese military leaders couldn't stomach to watch the footage of things done at the Unit 731. Ishii was director of. Genghis Khan caused so much devastation across Eurasia, and he's constantly venerated by historians and commoners alike for his conquests, even by the descendants of those he subjugated. The Mongol invasions caused the destruction of immense amounts of knowledge, most notably in the sack of Baghdad in 1258, when the House of Wisdom's books were reportedly thrown into the Tigris River, turning the water black from ink, and thousands of people were killed. This event marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age and resulted in the loss of vast stores of ancient texts and scientific achievements, setting back intellectual progress for centuries. I was looking for this one. It's crazy because he seemingly knew he was just going to get away with it. Given however many interviews was just admitting to it and everyone laughs it off because he's quirky. Benjamin Tillman, Governor of South Carolina from 1890 to 1894 and a senator from 1895 minus 1918. One of the most racist government officials in its history. Enslaved black people, was an active member of the Red Shirts, a terrorist group during Reconstruction that murdered, intimidated, and beat black people attempting to vote, bragged about stuffing ballet boxes to win elections, took part in lynchings, helped stage local coups in his home state and in North Carolina, was one of the key Southerners responsible for disenfranchising blacks and preventing any lynching legislation from passing when it was needed most, and currently has a hall named after him at Clemson University. For all the atrocities, he seemed to have a pretty chill life and died at the age of 100. Fits my definition of scot-free. The Forrest Gump of war crimes. Somehow had a hand in all of them after Nixon. Henry Kissinger is proof that karmic justice doesn't actually exist. He is responsible for the deaths and suffering of millions of people around the world. Yet he died at the age of 100, wealthy and well respected by his peers, while having his story conveniently whitewashed by the media. He lived a life of comfort, privilege and power and used all of that to enable some of the worst crimes against humanity. So if you think any of these figures who you see as evil are eventually going to be victims of karmic justice, you are very much mistaken. Justice is a thing enforced by people, not some force of nature that is applied evenly. Gaddafi didn't stick a bayonet up his own ass after all. Bayonet of consequences rarely arrives on its own, or something like that. He won a fucking peace prize. Political satire became obsolete when Henry Kissinger was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. For sure, many people in this thread have done far worse things, but few of them were as celebrated and accepted as Henry fucking Kissinger. Once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands. Amen. That bastard was responsible for a global domino effect of untold suffering, but he is celebrated as a titan of American prosperity and dominance by many people. King Leopold II of Belgium. He turned the Congo into his personal money machine, caused millions of deaths, and still managed to die peacefully in bed while his legacy got whitewashed for decades. Pinochet in Chile backed coups, ran death squads, and murdered thousands, yet he retired peacefully, avoided real punishment, and even got medical treatment abroad like nothing happened. Mengele, atrocious, barbaric experiments on Jews at Auschwitz. Then he fucked off to Brazil to start a family and died of a stroke in 1979. Wait, a stroke or drowning? Or did he have a stroke? Swimming? This thread is so confusing. He had a stroke while swimming and drowned. Pol Pot, probably the most evil dictator in history. And he got to slip away into the jungle and pass peacefully. Genghis Khan fell off his horse age 65 and died shortly after. He was responsible for butchering between 20–40 million people, around 10 of the world's population. He slaughtered entire populations of innocent people, women, children, babies, elderly, the lot, just to instill systematic terror to deter resistance. First person that comes to mind is Joseph Mengele, aka the Angel of Death. He was a Nazi in the SS stationed at Auschwitz, and is responsible for selecting who would be killed in the gas chambers and did human experimentation on Jewish prisoners. It's some of the most disgusting and grotesque stuff imaginable. After the war ended, he fled to Argentina and lived the rest of his life scot-free, dying on a beach in Brazil of old age. I've heard he kidnapped Argentinian and Brazilian people and experimented on them as well. Dude was pure evil and never had to pay for his crimes. Leopold II of Belgium was responsible for millions of deaths in the Congo Free State through forced labor, brutality, and exploitation. He was never held accountable and died wealthy and celebrated by many in Belgium. Brought to you in part by the Nixon-Kissinger admin. Leopold II of Belgium 1835–1909. The Japanese imperial family after WW2. They got off scot-free, despite being involved in many of the atrocities of the war, including the rape of Nanjing, which was led by Prince Yasuhiko Osaka, who was granted immunity. Just to give an idea, every month more people died under Japanese occupation than died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Let that sink in. 200.0 people died at those two attacks, and the average deaths per month under Imperial Japan was still higher, around 250.0 people a month. Henry Kissinger lived a long life but denied that right to many people around the world. He didn't get away scot-free. He was punished with a Nobel Peace Prize. All the groomers of the world who died without having their reputations properly tarnished for their hidden deeds. One can argue that this would be Hitler. Yes, he committed suicide. That, however, prevented him from being held into account for what he did. King Leopold of Belgium killed over 20 million Africans. That's a scale that I've never heard of. Richard Sackler comes to mind. Shiroishi, if I remember his name correctly. He led Unit 731 of Japan during the Second World War. If you do not know what it is, there is a great video on YouTube explaining. Also, don't watch if you have a problem with graphic content. There are likely many. Henry Kissinger comes to mind. How many people have died and how many will die in the future because of his anti-vax quackery? It wasn't quackery, he was actually promoting an alternative to the standard 3-part vaccine MMR that was a 2-shot and a single. He was implying the 3-shot had emergent negative effects it doesn't to push people to his company's alternative. The whole thing was about money. Lost his medical license and is pretty much a synonym for scientific fraud. That's consequences. From the Philippines, probably our last administration, President Joseph Stalin. I am surprised he has not a top answer. Is responsible for 20 million deaths, starved people to death, deported them to gulags, invaded Poland in 1939, occupied several East and Middle European countries after the war, died from a hemorrhage and pissed his pants. I'm shocked by how far I had to scroll to find Stalin. 2. In a way though, his death was comeuppance. His aides were afraid to call a doctor when they found him collapsed because he had just gone on a rampage against Jewish doctors. They were afraid that if he woke up and saw a doctor standing over him, they would be accused of trying to kill him. Or MAO. He killed even more people than Stalin. Papa Hafetz was probably worse. Joseph Mengele died at nearly 70 years old in Brazil, having never been arrested or tried for his crimes against humanity. Definitely for me, Jimmy Savile. We will never know the true scale of his crimes. Heard recently he was possibly in cahoots with Peter Sutcliffe and knew the Moors murderers. Also Fred West and Harold Shipman, who took the coward's way out. Robert Mugabe, the former dictator of Zimbabwe. He died in a private hospital in Singapore, while most of his people were too poor to even afford medicine, let alone groceries. Before he gained power, Zimbabwe was known as the breadbasket of Africa due to its historical economic strength in the region, but during Mugabe's 37-year reign, Zimbabwe became one of the poorest countries in the entire world due to corruption and economic mismanagement. Mugabe had security forces that brutalized civilians for opposing his government. He nationalized all the farmland in Zimbabwe, forcing the white families that ran them for generations off their land. Many of them ended up fleeing the country out of fear for their lives in an attempt to redistribute the land back to the black majority. But the thing was that these farms were previously private land that were ran by these families. So almost no one, not even the government, knew how to run them. With no one running these farms, food became more scarce, only adding to Zimbabwe's troubles. He was removed in a coup in 2017, but he was never arrested and never faced any real consequences for his reign of terror. Mao died in his bed. Stalin died in his bed. Genghis Khan died in his bed. Pol Pot died in his bed. King Leopold II died in his bed, though they booed his funeral procession. Hitler went out on his own terms. Trump lives in the White House. Netanyahu seems to be doing just fine. Take your pick. A better question would be who's the most evil person in history who actually paid for their crimes. I'll say Muammar Gaddafi, dragged out of a culvert and executed on video while begging my people for mercy. Mussolini close too. Maybe Saddam Hussein 3? Another one was Nicolae Ceausescu, the only Warsaw Pact dictator that met a bloody fate after the Berlin Wall fell. Escaped an angry mob in Bucharest in a helicopter, got captured soon after. Was sentenced to death by a show court and shot dead right after on TV. Gaddafi was sodomized to death with a bayonet in the streets by his own people. He paid the price. King Leopold II died in his palace at the ripe old age of 72 after brutally and systematically exploiting the people of the Congo Free State. King Leopold, hands down. A surprising number of evil people get off scot-free for their crimes, but he stands out to me. More recently, there was this woman who used to tell families of newborn children that the child died in birth and then would sell the babies to the highest bidder, which was usually a pedophile. Her crimes weren't discovered until after she had already died. I think her name was Georgia Tan. Also, the entire Sackler family, Surgeon General Shi Ishii, who ran Unit 731 in China during WW2, where he conducted horrifying human experiments, atrocities, and chemical warfare tests on the surrounding Chinese populace. He was ultimately never prosecuted, as he agreed to a deal with the US to share all the data and medical knowledge he gathered during that period. All the Nazi scientists giving free passes via Operation Paperclip. Werner von Braun in particular, half of Huntsville, Alabama is named after a fucking Nazi. Leopold Lines of Belgium. Millions died in the Congo Free State, and he basically lived like royalty until the end. Lots of high-level Nazis ran off to South America and got away with it. Pol Pot has to be up there. Those who murdered 17-year-old Junko Furuta. The woman who lied on Emmett Till and got to die an old woman. Richard Sackler of Purdue Pharma. He and his company caused thousands of deaths and destroyed so many families. Kim Il-sung was pretty shitty. I don't know about worst, but the guy's up there for sure. Also, Columbus basically exterminated the Taino, and he has a whole fucking holiday.